Hello and welcome back to Elfbait. I'm Eli, and you should know that by now. But if you're is this your first time here? Well, this is me. So, what's been going on? Well, I have been talking about the fact that I'm starting up 2 new campaigns in 2018. Already started talking about my Monday game, which is sort of my regular gaming group with the all-adult crew, and I've got my now what used to be my Sunday game, which is now my Saturday game, and that is for the teenagers in my life. And that campaign actually has a name, so you'll see it tagged in the campaign updates. But it is called Vagabond Seas. Yeah. It's a nautical campaign, so I came up with something. We just had our session 0, and that went over pretty well. Much better than my session 0, at least that I feel, than my session 0 for my Monday group. Session 0 is something that I don't think quite resonated with them, or maybe it was my first try or whatever. But this group, we really seem to actually get a good quality session 0 out of it, and we got everything in that session that you would hope to get out of a session 0. Collaboration between players, character concepts that kind of mesh together, and a good starting place for the game. So, a little bit about the campaign. So, with Tomb of Annihilation coming out, and all the really cool sandboxy stuff for Chult, all the tropical adventure stuff that's just been brought in there news-wise, and then my undying love for the Isle of Dread, and not only the original module, but the stuff that was done in 3.5 with, I believe it's the Shattered Coast or Shattered Seas adventure path they did across several issues. I really wanted to do a nautical campaign. Pirates is something that everybody likes. The kids really can get behind that. And while they're not necessarily pirates yet, that all starts from somewhere. So I wanted to do a game that was going to take it to the seas. And so that's kind of where I started from. And I developed sort of a good starting point, kind of a modest, humble place that gives them an excuse to leave. A lot of times when you start with cool villages or towns or whatever in the campaign, there's this problem with the location being so cool, so neat, or so comfortable that your adventurers really have no reason to leave it. So the starting point for Vagabond Seas will be a rundown kind of hideaway port called Beggar's Cove. Beggar's Cove is that place that you go to when you have a cargo full of stuff that you don't want to bring through a regular port. Down on there like sailors, runaways, castaways, just the general flotsam and jetsam, definitely all puns intended, seeing as it's a nautical campaign, just kind of congregate. You could think of it as sort of Mos Eisley or, any of that kind of location. But yes, so Beggar's Cove is where we started. So, the campaign will go from there through a series of different nautical adventures and eventually end up probably in Chult, or maybe not. Could be that the players want to go somewhere else, and I've got Tomb of Annihilation sitting on my shelf just as source material. But that's what I do. I'm more of a homebrew guy, so honestly, probably going to end up using a lot of stuff from other books just as source material. I do have most of the adventures from the Shattered Seas storyline set up as well. Don't know if I'm going to use the campaign itself, but a lot of them are really good adventures that just can be plugged in. But there's so much stuff out there for nautical campaigns. When Pirates of the Caribbean came out, there was an explosion of material. Freeport for 3.5, the D20 system and all of that, gives you an insane amount of nautical stuff. So there's just all of this stuff that you can really just chew up and spit out into whatever campaign you want. But it gives me an excuse to eventually use Tomb of Annihilation, which I like, and get the players to Isle of Dread. I'm a big pulp adventure guy too, so for me, jungle adventures, exotic islands, ancient temples, lost civilizations, that's just in my blood. I love that stuff. And so can really have fun with that. It's one of my favorite things to run. So, session 0, what do we do? Well, like any session 0, I sat down with everybody and kind of laid out the specifics, what what the campaign type was going to be, what new information there was to know, what limitations there were. And so for this, I had a few limitations. I wanted to keep odd races to a minimum. Odd races, to me, being even anything like tieflings or dragonborn. Now, that's going to become kind of ironic here in a moment when you start hearing about the characters. But I also worked in some stuff like we are, yes, going to be playing this campaign with gunpowder. I have not run a campaign that specifically uses gunpowder, but I feel for high seas adventure, gunpowder is almost it's a given. Trying to do a high seas campaign without gunpowder requires a lot of backtracking creatively to not just automatically do what you see in sailing movies. Warships without gunpowder become really odd things. Galleys with rams and catapults and forecastles and archers on board and all of that, and a lot of boarding action. And while that's cool, and some of that certainly might come into play, there's a certain just expedience when you're dealing with nautical stuff that benefits from gunpowder. Now, gunpowder weapons do not ruin campaigns. I know a lot of people are probably rolling their eyes and reeling at that. But gunpowder, if you really think about gunpowder the way it works, gunpowder weapons are easier for any Joe to use. To use them effectively, though, you still have to be trained and you still have to be proficient. They are slower than other missile weapons, so certainly spears, javelins, throwing axes, throwing knives, crossbows, bows are all still viable and actually are going to be faster than a gun. A gun may do more damage per shot, so it evens out. But in a D&D sense, I mean, if you really imagine a character adventuring with guns, to be effective in combat with guns, you'd really have to have a brace of pistols, more, maybe a long rifle or a blunderbuss or a duckfoot or some crazy weapon that was going to give you a good wide spread of shots. And it still ends up often coming down to melee. You only have so much time to shoot. So I don't really feel that that's going to unbalance the game. The third thing that I threw in is ironically enough, while I'm talking about not having crazy races, I really dug the idea of the goblins as presented in Watsy's Wizards of the Coast. Planeshift Ixalan. So Ixalan, if you're not familiar with it, is their new Magic the Gathering setting for this particular series of releases they're doing. And it's kind of a Lost World, not kind of, it is a Lost World island adventure with pirates and all of that fun stuff. So I really liked the goblins as they were presented in Ixalan, and they actually threw back mindset for me. They kind of harked back to in AD&D in Monster Manual 2. Actually, it was from another adventure, but you first got it unless you actually bought the adventure. The Tasloi. The Tasloi were jungle goblins in D&D, and so here we got the sort of parallel. We got Ixalan, which is presenting jungle goblins that are very monkey-like, and then the Tasloi from D&D, which were arboreal jungle goblins. And so I just sort of mashed them up thematically. So in my game, they are the Tasloi. Most people call them monkey goblins because, and that'll become clear in a bit, why. So I threw those in as a player race. I think it's a fun option. It's a way to have kind of a piratey campaign. I mean, they can climb, so they're up in the ring. And so the background for those in this setting is nobody really knows where they came from. Pretty much none of the living monkey goblins know where they came from. As far as the human kingdoms and all of the existing folks in the setting, they just showed up on the high seas one time. You kind of this flood of refugees coming in. And so because of their natural talents for climbing and their relative intelligence and their capriciousness, they and the fact that they're small, they've become just sort of the go-to hireling ship crew. So pretty much every ship is going to have, a bunch of these guys scurrying through the lines. I mean, no human can really outdo a monkey goblin when they're climbing, in the rigging and stuff, and they can get under the decks, and they can get into the bilge and stuff really easy. So I threw them in. They were a good fit. Now I'm happy that one of my players played one. It's never fun when you throw out a really cool idea for your campaign and nobody bites. It's like, oh, I've got this cool thing and nobody's playing it. All right, cool. So, well, that was kind of the parameter, what I laid out up front. No classes were off limits. No races were strictly off limits, but I did want to limit the oddball classes. I did sort of make it clear that things like Goliaths and I didn't want Dragonborn at all. I have plans for the Dragonborn, but I don't want them. I don't want them as player races. I am still coming to terms with the otter races like Tieflings and Dragonborn. So what did I end up with? So my players are my daughter, two of her friends from school, and my nephew and my wife. And so I've got 2 14-year-olds, a 15-year-old, and a 16-year-old, and my wife. And I won't tell you her age because that's not nice. Anyways, we ended up with sort of a round table. And the nice thing about the Session Zero is that it was very interactive. People were helping each other. My nephew was helping folks make their characters. He's a little bit more experienced. He's also a 5th edition DM himself. And so there was a lot of interplay in both the practical mechanical aspects of character generation, but also cross-pollination and of ideas. And so this is what we ended up with. I ended up with 2 tieflings, which is funny because I was really trying to have 0 tieflings, but the idea was really good and I couldn't say no. So what did I have tiefling-wise? I ended up with Thea and Blethyn. I can't remember the one name that one of my players came up with. Basically 2 tiefling rogues. They both took the urchin background, and I won't explain the origins of these characters because I kind of want to tell that tale after I tell you what they are. So those 2 players are looking at making, eventually, they're all first level, but they're eventually looking at going thief and assassin, so 2 flavors of rogue. And I believe Blethyn or Blathen or whatever is possibly going with the angle that her character has killed somebody in the past. And that's, I guess, the jumping off point towards assassin. My nephew made a dwarf who is a transmuter transmuter wizard with a hermit background. The two tieflings, again, they were urchins. My daughter's other friend had made a character who is a wood elf tempest cleric with a sage background, and my wife made a monkey goblin. Yay! Using the idea, monkey goblin who is also a rogue. I believe she's going to go towards swashbuckler, but he's got the sailor background. So this was our start. Oddly enough, we don't have any tanky fighters, so the swashbuckler and the assassin are probably going to end up being the more fighty people. But at the same time, a Tempest cleric is actually a pretty heavy-hitting cleric, and a Transmuter mage has a lot of power to throw around. So I don't think they're going to really suffer too much combat-wise. So that was what we ended up with, race class-wise. I'm happy with the blend. I think thematically it all fits for this environment of Beggar's Cove. And so then we started working on storyline. So, I mean, I used just regular note cards, and I had everybody write down for me, statistics. I'm going to go and transfer those over to a little DM's aid for myself. But also I had them go through, and I told each of them to write me down 4 details about their character's past. 4 little things that happened in their character's past. So we got spent 8 years with Thalius, and that is for my wife. that's talking about her monkey goblin. Spent 8 years with the last captain, and regularly carried illegal cargo and a spy for the captain. So cool little background bits that gives me, and they're vague. I like the fact that they're vague, because that gives me the option to work, well, who did she spy on? It's not important, but later on, if they were to run into other ship's crews, it could be that that spy past, that spying for the captain comes back to haunt her. Or maybe to benefit from her. Maybe she knows a member of another crew because at some point she was spying and maybe infiltrated that crew. Vague little details like that are cool. My nephew's character, he dropped a book in the ocean for 6 years and managed to get it back. That's kind of cool. I like that. So and actually it's funny because I'm reading these first time on this video. So if you're seeing my first reactions. These are real live reactions. It's bad we did these last Saturday, but I haven't had a chance to look at them. We ran out of time and it was a quick cleanup and they just kind of got stacked. So I'm looking at these for the first time. So these are honest reactions to some of the stuff that's going through. The fact that this character dropped the book in the ocean and he managed to recover it 6 years later, leaves some really interesting openings. What happened to the book? How is it that he got it back 6 years later? That's really kind of cool. I like that. Let's see. The Wood Elf. The Wood Elf is in Beggar's Cove because she was abandoned by her parents. So she's actually an orphan left in Beggar's Cove by wood elves. What kind of wood elf leaves themselves in some scuzzy little oceanside city? Who knows? Maybe there's a reason for that. But again, vague details, but I love the background details that are basic, but open-ended. And putting it on a card, having your players put them on these cards doesn't give them a huge amount of area to write, and asking them for like 4 things will also mean that they're really going to bullet point it. I mean, another one, let's see. She prays to the merfolk god of the sea. So she's a tempest priest, and so rather than pray to an elven god, which you would think would be the normal, she actually prays to the merfolk. I like that because it gives her sort of a hedge witchy or hedge priest kind of feel. She's not praying to the traditional gods of her people. She's not even praying to probably the local human god. She prays to the god, to a ocean god from under the sea, from a people under the sea. So that's going to give her an interesting niche in that community. So even first level through third level, we may never actually leave Beggar's Cove, and it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. But yeah, I mean, and then the 2 tieflings, they grew up together in an orphanage. An interesting note, they are actually a couple. My daughter decided to play a male character, and the other tiefling is her character's girlfriend. But they grew up together, so they're kind of like the whole childhood sweethearts thing that ran away. They left the orphanage because they were going to be sold into slavery. Because they were different. They ran away at age 5 though, so they ran away really early. Because they found out that they were going to be sold, probably for their exotic appearance, because they are tieflings and they're like bright pastel colors and have horns and tails. So yeah, I mean, those are, these cards. I got so much good information in here that can just inform the game. Some of this may not come out. Some of it may not come out for a long time. Some of it's stuff I could use immediately. So that is who they are. The next thing, of course, that you want to do with a session 0 and is to try and figure out how you can use this background information and how you can bring these characters together into some sort of connection to where you're not doing you're in an inn. Well, they might start out in a tavern, but at least at this point, the tavern isn't where they're going to meet. Chances are if I start them out in the tavern, it's because they're all hanging out there. So this is what we came up with. So, Thea, the street cleric who actually owns and runs a small little chapel on the docks, where she accepts a few coins from the local sailors, occasionally to bless their fishing boats, bless their voyage, praying to that sort of pagan god that's around that may not be the regular god, that extra insurance, so that's how she turns her pays for her little hovel that's probably in the back room of her chapel. Now, that position on the docks leaves her central to meeting some of the other characters. The two tieflings, whose names I will not try to repeat because, well, there's Thea and then there's Blythine. The elf is... Thea is the wood elf cleric. Sorry about that. Gotta retcon it. Valafar is the other tiefling. Valafar and Blythane. Yeager is the dwarf, and the monkey goblin is Thebaziza, or more commonly known as Blue, because her fur is blue. So, the two tieflings, since they've run away, they've actually lived as urchins on the streets of Beggar's Cove, and have frequently interacted with Thea, the Tempest cleric, who runs her little chapel. She's helped out, healed them, given them food, charity, whatever. They've also helped her out. At the same time, Yeager, or Yadgar, I think it's Yadgar because it's a dwarf, so I automatically put kind of the Norse slant on it, but it might be Yeager, was originally the apprentice for the old kind of sea hermit that lived way out in a little stone hut at the, or stone and wood. I believe it was actually a stilted hut. He had described it as at the end of the quay, and he knows the other characters because he would come into town running the errands for that hermit. When the old wizard, the old sea wizard, died and left his hovel, his little hermit shack to Yeager. Yeager continued on with his studies and became kind of the new hermit, but he's not so hermity because, well, he has connections with the village. Doesn't necessarily like it, but he comes in. An odd little aside, my nephew has decided that Yeager, though he's a dwarf, is an absolute teetotaler. He does not drink. He does not, imbibe of any kind of spirits or mind-altering substances because that got him in trouble when he was younger. Another aside, an aside to an aside, Yeager's name is actually derived from J. Edgar, because we were looking for some sort of prohibitionist tie, whatever. But anyways, yeah, so that's my nephew. But so then that brings us to Thebaziza, or Blue, the monkey goblin. Blue is currently between ships. The last ship that Blue was on sank under mysterious circumstances, so he's kind of stuck in port, waiting, to crew up on another vessel. And he's kind of been, being a kind of a roustabout, sort of, helping with porting stuff in and around, and just doing odd jobs. He's kind of got to know the other characters and Thea, the cleric. So right there, all the characters have a reason to know each other. They have a relationship, they have a connection, and so any number of combinations could be used to bring them to adventure. Thea's god might send a vision. She might portent something in the storm or the travel of the birds. Yeager might find some old bit of information or something interesting in the keepsakes and treasures left by his former master. Perhaps Blue's past as a ship's crewman comes back to haunt him, and he has to make a rapid, departure from town. Perhaps he schmoozes with some of his old shipmates or other people he's run into coming in and out of Beggar's Cove, and is, tuned into some sort of call to adventure. The orphans, the two tieflings, it could be that their past comes back to haunt them. One of the things that they noted down in their, because with those two having a tight connection, I asked them to do 4 things that were unique, that were 4 things that they shared in common as far as background, and then each of them write down 1 thing that was unique to them. So one thing they both had in common is after they reached young adulthood or youth or whatever, they went back to O'Reilly, Mr. O'Reilly's home for the abandoned. So the orphanage was Mr. O'Reilly's home for the abandoned, and they went back and raided it, freeing all of the orphans, because they had been mistreated, and the orphans had been mistreated there as well. They just assumed. So maybe O'Reilly has some reason to come after them. Maybe something happens to O'Reilly, and suspicions are cast upon these tieflings. Could be that something happens to one of the orphans. I mean, one of the former orphans that they shared time with at that orphanage comes and asks them for help. Maybe they they start disappearing. These origins, these backgrounds for these characters, are chocked full of reasons to get them questing, and the connections immediately draws them all in. Hey, if the two orphan tieflings end up being the reason for the trouble, well, maybe they would ask for help from the people they trust. Thea, the priest, the priestess, or depending on the trouble, they might seek help from Yidgir. If Blue gets a call to adventure through some sort of item, or asked to go on an adventure on a ship, he might bring along his friends. Yidgir might find something that he needs help with. Perhaps there's some piece of lore that he could use a couple of handy roguish types to try and exploit. These are all reasons that they could come together. So that's sort of the starting point for the Vagabond Seas campaign. The creation of the characters, race, class, and whatever, and then also the backgrounds and how I tied them together, and how those backgrounds seed into adventure. I think when you're doing this is actually a very successful Session Zero. This has restored my faith in the concept of Session Zero. Session Zero isn't really anything I ever did officially in the past. I've been gaming for a long, long time, and often playing with people that I hung out with on a regular basis. Game sessions might have unofficial Session Zeros, or some sort of organic thing where we would, just kind of shoot the breeze and come up with something. But it was never really a Session Zero. It's like, as you're passing by the roommates, hey, what are you making in Bob's game, over the weekend? Oh, I'm gonna do a fighter. Cool. What are you playing? I'm gonna do a cleric. All right, cool. Well, you want to have our characters be brothers? Yeah, we kind of did things on the fly. I mean, sometimes it was like, hey, we want to play D&D? Okay, cool. What are we playing? We're playing Oriental Adventures. What are you going to do? I'm going to be a samurai. I'm going to be a Sohei. I'm going to be a Yakuza thief, whatever. And just off the top of your head. But as far as actual organized Session Zeros, this is the second one I've done. The first one, I was a little hesitant to really get behind the concept, but part of that may have been how I was executing it. But also, it's very likely that my players just didn't interface with the concept either. There were some rough points in that really, I think, gave me the impression that that as a Session Zero, it wasn't really a success. Interestingly enough, after some time, that we're having some retroactive, or not retroactive, but delayed action, some delayed action positive feedback and results from that first Session Zero, from my Monday campaign. But this one, the one for Vagabond Seas, was an unarguable success. Everything that you would want out of a Session Zero came out of this. We have characters that fit together, and it's a pretty solid party. I mean, sure, there's no dedicated fighter, but we've got rogues can fight. We've got different rogues, and we've got some pretty heavy-hitting spellcasters, and the backgrounds and the reasons for adventuring are all there. Everybody seemed to jive with the setting. They really seemed to get into it, and yeah, they're teenagers, so there was some herding of cats at times, but they really performed well. So I'm very positive about where this campaign's going. With this game, does not play as often in my Monday game because I do have to deal with kids from 4 different households, and so having every Saturday tied up is just not a thing you can do. So that's every 2 weeks we play that game. So it'll be another week before I'll actually have the first session of the game on that one. But yeah, I am psyched. I get to run a nautical campaign, a high seas campaign that's going to go to all sorts of cool places, and my players have interesting characters. I love the idea of the monkey goblin, swashbuckler. I love the idea of 2 tiefling rogues that have a kind of a shady past. A storm wizard who's kind of this disheveled sea wizard guy. And a priestess of the merfolk goddess or god of the sea. All of that really just jives well. I mean, it doesn't necessarily make for a crew in and of itself, but I could see at low levels finding a place on a crew and being very useful to that crew, or maybe they do set out on their own boat. But we'll actually see where they go, and you'll be hearing updates on that as regularly as I can get them. Just a heads up. I don't expect that I'll have a regular schedule for campaign updates. Some sessions just don't render enough content to really make for an interesting session. I've still got to do a session 2 recap for my Monday game, but I may hold off on that until session 3. Session 2 was the finish up of the adventure for session 1, which is an intentionally short adventure that then fed into another one that is also probably going to be similarly short. So I may just wait till I have session 3 for my Monday game. But enough about that. This is about the session 0 for Vagabond Seas. I hope you really enjoyed hearing my process and how it went. If you have comments, put them on down below. Discuss, comment, feedback, whatever you want to do. Ideas for your own campaigns, questions about a sea campaign, anything like that you want to throw in, that's the place to do it. As usual, please, if you enjoyed my videos, I know it's just me in my garage and there's no fancy graphics and it's nothing special, but I'm doing what I can with what I got. And if you like this, like, share, and subscribe. If you know folks who are looking for videos that are from the heart, and really they are, and they're looking for something for somebody who's been around for a while, but also is really open and responsive to beginners, send them my way. I am one of many, but I certainly have a voice, and I'm more than happy to share it. So, Vagabond Seas, keep an eye out. Look to the horizon. High adventure is on its way, hopefully. But as usual, thanks for checking it out. Get out and game. Have a good one, guys.